Hello and welcome back to another IELTS speaking lesson. Today we're really going to focus on native, clear pronunciation of key phrases and expressions which are commonly used within the IELTS speaking test. So I've mapped out 40 very common phrases and expressions which are used often throughout the IELTS speaking test, and I think that it's really useful and important that you're able to use these expressions and to say them, pronounce these expressions with clarity. So we're going to go through, we're going to do a pronunciation rehearsal with me using native pronunciation techniques such as contractions or linking sounds, as well as like glottal T's, these kinds of things. So it's really important that you practice with me. It's also important to say before we move on that there's no correct accent to use. Many students often ask me, what's the best accent to use in the IELTS speaking test? There is none. The main focus is on clarity, but if you can use native techniques within pronunciation, like contractions, that's going to help improve your band score. But you don't score extra marks for using an American or British accent. There's no better accent. And in fact, you can also use a neutral accent too. There's nothing wrong with just a plain English accent, neutral, as long as it's clear and easily understood. Okay, so we'll work through these 40 expressions. I'll talk about the different interesting parts of each expression in terms of pronunciation, and then we'll see the expression used within a sentence. Try and repeat this lesson. So you might want to rehearse this a few times. You might want to try it every day for a couple of weeks and see if your pronunciation has improved. Repetition of rehearsal with the lessons within this course is really important, and it's something that will help you in not just this lesson but many other lessons too. Okay, so let's take a look at our first expression, which is today I'm going to talk about. Now, do take note of I'm gonna. It's not I'm going to, am gonna. Okay, try repeat after me. Today, I'm going to talk about. Today, I'm going to talk about. And just try this short part here. I'm gonna. Today, I'm going to talk about. And also take note that about has no NT sound. There's a glottal T. Today, I'm going to talk about. Okay, so let's see this used within a sentence. Today, I'm going to talk about my least favourite sport. Today, I'm going to talk about my least favourite sport. Well, I think I'll tell you about. Well, I think I'll tell you about. Okay, so this is probably not so much to add here in terms of different sounds. I think Kyle. So there's a slight linking here. I think Kyle. Or it sounds like a boy's name. Kyle. I think Kyle. So try repeat after me one more time, then we'll see within a sentence. Well, I think I'll tell you about. And let's see this used within a full sentence. Well, I think I'll tell you about my trip to Spain. Well, I think I'll tell you about my trip to Spain. That's an interesting question. That's an interesting question. So you'll note here that that'sen. There's a linking sound here. The an isn't so clearly pronounced independently. It's not that's an, that san. That's an interesting question. That's an interesting question. And in a sentence, yeah, that's an interesting question. Let me see. And one more time. Yeah, that's an interesting question. Let me see. Today, I'd like to discuss. Today, I'd like to discuss. One thing I'd like to point out here is the strong schwa sound in to. It's not to, it's t. One more time. Today, I'd like to discuss. And in a sentence. Today, I'd like to discuss my love of cinemas and movies. Today, I'd like to discuss my love of cinema and movies. One interesting linking sound here is love of, my love of. It's almost a difficult thing to say with the v sounds. My love of. Let's try one more time. Today, I'd like to discuss my love of cinema and movies. In my experience, In my experience, it's better to work in teams than independently. In my experience, it's better to work in teams than independently. Okay, not so much to add here. Just good to try and repeat this after me. So let's do one more time, the whole sentence, then we'll move on. In my experience, it's better to work in teams than independently. Okay, our next expression is what happened was. So try repeating after me. What happened was. What happened was. So one thing to note here is the very strong glottal T on what. We don't say what happened was. We say what. What. What happened was. What happened was. And in a sentence. What happened was my friend completely missed the train. What happened was my friend completely missed the train. Back when I was. Back when I was. So looking at back, we really don't stress the sound of the final K. It's more like back. Glottal sound here. Back when I was. One more time. Back when I was. Back when I was just a little kid. Back when I was just a little kid. So before we move on, there's just a few things to point out here in this very British sounding sentence. Back when I was. Justa. So there's a strong link here between justa. Try after me. Justa. And little. You could maybe pronounce the T a little bit stronger if you want to sound more posh. Little kid. But let's do more native. Just a little kid. Just a little kid. Back when I was just a little kid. One more time. Back when I was just a little kid. Okay, moving on. Thinking back on it. Try repeating after me. Thinking back on it. Thinking back on it. So the back on it. Thinking back on it. There's a link here between the back and the on. So try one more time after me. Thinking back on it. And in a sentence. Well, thinking back on it, we should have planned a bit more carefully. Well, thinking back on it, we should have planned a bit more carefully. When I look back, a couple of things to note here. When I. So there's a linking sound here. When I look back. So the last K sound for back, it could be pronounced or probably more natural without. When I look back. One more time. When I look back. When I look back on university, I feel really happy. Important to note here that we are actually linking back on again. So the K sound is pronounced but joined with on. Let's try this one more time. When I look back on university, I feel really happy. And expressing opinions, a very useful expression for IELTS speaking. In my opinion. In my opinion. In my opinion, England's weather's pretty cold. So there's quite a few different S sounds of note here. So we've got the possessive England's, and then we've got weather's here. And it's actually weather is contracted to weathers. So try this, just the two words there. England's weathers. England's weathers. England's weather's pretty cold. Pretty cold. England's weather's pretty cold. And the whole sentence? In my opinion, England's weather's pretty cold. Almost a tongue twister there. Great practice, this example sentence. Let's move on. For me. For me. So for is the word here that we need to be careful with our pronunciation over, and it's the strong schwa sound, f, for me. For me, it's important to balance family life with work. For me, it's important to balance family life with work. I feel that. I feel that. There's something of a glottal T here instead of I feel that. I feel that. Try one more time. I feel that. I feel that art is just as important as education. I feel that art is just as important as education. I've always considered. I've always considered. So there's a link between the first two words. I've always, always. I've always. I've always. I've always considered. And the full sentence? I've always considered riding a bike a great way to get around. I've always considered riding a bike a great way to get around. As far as I'm concerned, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I'm concerned, cities are great places to live. As far as I'm concerned, cities are great places to live. And here we have some expressions when you're really expressing a strong opinion. I'm absolutely convinced that. I'm absolutely convinced that. Let's try the first two words as there's a linking sound here. I'm absolutely. I'm absolutely. I'm absolutely convinced that. I'm absolutely convinced that online news is dangerous. I'm absolutely convinced that online news is dangerous. I'm 100% certain. I'm 100% certain. I'm 100% certain that I'll live in Australia at some point. I'm 100% certain that I'll live in Australia at some point. This is actually a quite difficult example sentence. The focus phrase, I'm 100% certain, isn't really the difficulty. The phrases after can be quite tough. Let's look at that I'll live in. There's a lot of linking here. That I'll live in. That I'll live in. There's a link between that I'll live in. Live in. Let's try the tile. Try after me. The tile. The tile. That I'll live in. That I'll live in. I'm 100% certain that I'll live in. I'm 100% certain that I'll live in. And all together, I'm 100% certain that I'll live in Australia at some point. Quite a tricky one there, maybe one that we could repeat a few times to get right. Let's move on to the next one. I'm certainly sure. I'm certainly sure. I'm certainly sure she was having a tough time. I'm certainly sure she was having a tough time. And here we have some expressions for discussing possibilities. I suppose that. I suppose that. I suppose that talking with my mates can be pretty fun sometimes. I suppose that talking with my mates can be pretty fun sometimes. Perhaps. Notice the schwa, p. Perhaps. One more time. Perhaps. Perhaps I'll try and study for my postgrad degree soon. Perhaps I'll try and study for my postgrad degree soon. It's quite likely. It's quite likely. Notice here that I'm not stressing the T in quite or K in likely. One more time. It's quite likely. It's quite likely I'll move home after my studies. It's quite likely I'll move home after my studies. Let's try that end expression. After my studies. After my studies. I'll move home after my studies. I'll move home after my studies. It's quite likely I'll move home after my studies. It's unlikely that. It's unlikely that. It's unlikely that my country's government will sort it out. This final expression, sort it out, there's quite a lot of linking sounds there, and it basically is an expression, a very colloquial British expression to mean fix something, sort it out. Try and repeat after me. Sort it out. Sort it out. And the whole sentence? It's unlikely that my country's government will sort it out. I'd say. I'd say. I'd say owning a pet could be a real exciting experience. I'd say owning a pet could be a real exciting experience. And some phrases for agreeing and disagreeing. We're not going to take a look at some example sentences here. We'll just repeat the expressions. I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. T'agree. T'agree. Couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I'm afraid I can't agree there. I'm afraid I can't agree there. Can't agree there. I can't agree there. I'm afraid I can't agree there. I'm not sure I can agree. I'm not sure I can agree. Okay, some expressions for comparing and contrasting. Similar to. Similar to. London is quite similar to New York in many ways. London is quite similar to New York in many ways. Much the same. Much the same. My new job is much the same as my previous one. My new job is much the same as my previous one. In comparison to. In comparison to. Swimming, in comparison to football, is much more fun. Swimming, in comparison to football, is much more fun. In contrast to. In contrast to. You notice I changed the to sound there. It's probably more natural to say to. One more time. In contrast to. In contrast to my sister, I'm not so sociable these days. In contrast to my sister, I'm not so sociable these days. Okay, so we'll look at some expressions you can use when asking for clarification. It's something that students are very shy of, but if you do need to ask for clarification or you have a question for the IELTS examiner, do so. Do feel confident to ask. And these are some expressions that you can use, so repeat after me. Sorry, I didn't quite get that. Sorry, I didn't quite get that. There's actually quite a lot to take in with this expression in terms of native pronunciation. So didn't becomes didn't, didn't. And there's no T there. Didn't, didn't. I didn't, I didn't. And quite without the T. I didn't quite. I didn't quite. Sorry, I didn't quite. And then the glottal T's get that. All together, sorry, I didn't quite get that. Sorry, I didn't quite get that. Could you say that again, please? One more time. Could you say that again, please? So it's the same, the middle section, I didn't quite, becomes I didn't quite. And then catch that is an idiomatic expression meaning understand. Repeat after me. Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. If you want to sound more academic, you can say didn't. So let's try one time with that. Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Okay, so let's take a look at some generally useful common expressions that you can also use a lot within IELTS speaking, and do make sure you're repeating after me. That's an interesting question. Notice the linked san at the start. That's an interesting question. That's an interesting question. Let me think about it. That's an interesting question. Let me think about it. I'd have to say. I'd have to say. I'd have to say I laugh at most jokes. And now with the that, I'd have to say that I laugh at most jokes. I can't get enough of it. I can't get enough of it. This is kind of an idiomatic expression which means that you really love something. I love ice cream. I can't get enough of it. I love ice cream. I can't get enough of it. Looking back, I'd say. Looking back, I'd say. So another expression here for remembering. Looking back, I'd say I should have studied more in school. Looking back, I'd say I should have studied more in school. Off the top of my head, so this is an idiomatic expression again, basically meaning the first thing I can think of is, one more time, off the top of my head. Off the top of my head, the hardest book I read was Crime and Punishment. Something of a rhyme in there. Let's try that one more time. Off the top of my head, the hardest book I read was Crime and Punishment. To be completely honest. To be completely honest. To be completely honest, I've never really liked my hometown. To be completely honest, I've never really liked my hometown. On the other hand, on the other hand, on the other hand, it was difficult but rewarding in many ways. On the other hand, it was difficult but rewarding in many ways. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this pronunciation-focused lesson. I would really suggest you could really spend quite a long time running through this video and repeating after me. I would maybe suggest that if you're really wanting to improve on your natural pronunciation, to have 2 or 3 weeks where you run through this lesson once a day and repeat after me as much as possible. I'm sure that after 2 or 3 weeks, you'll find that your pronunciation is beginning to improve, become more natural, clear, and native too. So it's definitely something I would recommend you to try. And yes, that brings us to the end of the lesson. So I'll see you back in the course.